Hello everyone and welcome to Deckbuilding Derezzed. I'm your host Code Marvelous, and today I am again joined by a repeat guest, Seamus from the United Kingdom. Go ahead and say hi, Seamus.
Hello, A&R Black Hats.
So, I wanted to have Seamus on today because he won a regional in Hamilton with Argus, my favorite Wayland identity. It was actually the very first identity that I ever made a video on. But before we get into that, Seamus, why don't you tell everybody watching at home who maybe hasn't seen your other videos or doesn't know about you a little bit about your Netrunner journey and how you came to be a fellow Wayland defender like myself?
I don't know if there's an interesting story to how I first started playing Wayland. Basically, Blue Sun came out and it was great. What might be a more interesting story is how I ended up on Argus. There was I think it was a Genesis Cycle only tournament, and me and a group of friends couldn't make it, but we thought it would be a really fun idea, and we'd been hoping we'd make it, so we'd been discussing what sort of decks we might play, and that was a card pool that I never played with. I started after that around Creation and Control. So we decided just on one of our regular meetup nights to all bring Genesis Cycle decks, and right. I landed on, which is the core Wayland, Building a Better World.
Building a Better World.
And sort of like a pseudo super modernism thing. Obviously, some of the cards for that were in the spin cycle, but an approximation of it. And I had a great time playing that, and then actually beat one of my friends with his normal full card pool deck. So I thought maybe there's something
here.
Yeah. And
so you never played. Wait. Hang on. You never played in the golden age where Wayland was just like flatlining fools like all the time.
Nope.
Yeah, okay. Because, like, the Genesis Cycle was, like, the Wild West of just Wayland flatlining you if you ran with less credits.
Yep.
Like, because we didn't have the draw that we have, so people were stacking, like, 2 or 3 Plascretes in decks to stay alive.
Yeah, no, so, by the time I started, there was, like, one guy in our local meta who was still carrying, like, the Supermodernism torch. Hi, American John. We call him that because his name's John and he's an American.
I put that together.
In case anyone was unclear. So it was sort of a bit like PE. Like, if you weren't used to it, he'd get you. But it had passed its glory days where once you were practiced against it, it was quite hard for it to do its tricks. Right.
So, tell me a little bit about what attracted you to the Argus ID for the building of this deck.
Obviously one of the key strengths of Supermodernism was the inclusion of snares and the sort of punishing the runner for being too aggressive while being incredibly aggressive yourself. And I wasn't a particular fan of Argus when it was spoiled, particularly just because immediately people sort of started looking at it as like the Wayland PE, where you take lots and lots of small agendas. And I just thought, I don't know why I thought that would be worse than PE, but just I suppose you don't have as many trap cards and snares you're paying influence for. So if you're going to do that, I feel like you do it in PE, and even then that deck has a lot of issues.
Well, it goes back to what you were just saying. If you're really practiced against it,
exactly,
people just pilot around it.
Exactly that. But once I'd sort of got the Supermodernism bug, I thought, well, what if every agenda was a miniature snare? What if every time you make them run through a server to stop you winning on the next score, they're also having to save a click to clear a tag or take meat damage? And, you know, if they've not got I've Had Worse or Plascrete down, then that may take them down to a single Scorch range. You know, I mean, it's all obvious stuff. There's not really any great insight on my part on that, but it seemed like an interesting thing to explore outside, rather than just using the Building a Better World ID. The Argus card has fantastic art, so it's always nice to get it out of the binder.
Yeah.
So yeah, it just seemed to make sense, and I started playing it, and it worked really well, so I stuck with it.
Yeah, it's also just really oppressive. Like, one of the things that I love about this, when this came out, this was the one that I was most excited for out of the big box. Just because I was like, this feels like Wayland. It's just super oppressive. It controls the behavior of the runner, right? Like, they know what your game plan is when you slap this down on the table.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's the line I always use is, when I sit down across from someone I don't know, I say, I'm actually playing a vegan Argus deck, so just for thematic purposes, if you could just take the tags, that would be great. And obviously it's vegan, so you don't need to worry about clearing them.
Yeah. How often does that work?
It's
very
not
often.
worked yet, but I'm going to keep it up and see if I can get a free win at Nationals.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. But yeah, so Argus, you have to take a tag or suffer 2 meat damage every time you steal an agenda, for those of you who may not be aware. So it's just pretty neat, because tags are awful, and meat damage is awful. So let's start, I guess, let's start with the agenda suite, just because, as you mentioned, you're not doing the shell game, so you don't have, like, the 16 agendas, which is often more standard in Argus. You've got 12. So let's take a look and see what we've got. So first up, we have 2 geothermal frackings.
Okay. So I suppose we can start there because they're potentially the least interesting. So geothermal fracking is basically just in there because it fits with your agendas, fund you scoring more agendas. They're probably the least important agendas in the deck. If there were other good 4/2s, they would definitely be competing for those slots. I suppose one thing that people asked when I published the list was whether I considered corporate sales teams in those roles, because then you don't have to spend the clicks getting the money, it just drips in.
And no bad pub.
Yeah. To be honest, though, I mean, this deck piles on so much bad pub, you're best just not worrying about it. I think the geothermal fracking, I did actually test corporate sales team right before regionals, although not to like a huge degree. I think geothermal fracking edges it because particularly if you can install and double advance it and then score it the next turn and then click for 7, that's particularly strong. A turn where you click for 14 is always intimidating for the runner. It's a decent agenda. It's not the one that makes the deck sing, but it's good enough.
Right, and, it helps with C-source money in a way that corporate sales team isn't necessarily.
Yeah.
So we've got hostile takeovers, the core set Wayland staple, and one of my favorite agendas.
I don't think that certainly this deck wouldn't work without it. The money's great. If you can't start scoring an Oaktown, which we'll come to on your first turn, then an equally acceptable turn is Ice HQ, get some money, and then fire a hostile out turn 2.
Right.
Or, if you're sure you're not going to face Siphon and all you've got in hand agenda-wise is a hostile, just fire it out first turn. Free
it's
money,
also
good stuff.
It's also worth noting that, like 15 minutes and breaking news, like this helps you clear a current, an oppressive current as well.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, so with the fear of IG going around, people have started playing a lot of Employee Strike, which can be annoying. Generally, with this deck, you're scoring so frequently, or if you're not scoring that frequently, you've lost regardless of the Employee Strike.
Right.
But it's fantastic if they just stick down an Employee Strike and you're just like, the very next turn, hostile. Sorry.
Right, get rid of it, yeah. Oh, Oaktown renovation. Oh, it's so good.
So I think...
Hang on, real quick. Yep. It's a 4/2, everybody. So every time it's a face-up agenda, and every time you advance it, you gain 2 credits. So effectively, it nets you 1 credit every time you advance it. If you ever hit 5 advancements, which you're likely not to, you start getting 3 or more. But it's just, they know it's an agenda, so go ahead, because you can talk about all the mind games and things that you can do with this.
So, I think this is probably the reason that Supermodernism has started to function again, because when you were doing sort of like the sales pitch for Supermodernism back in the day, you'd say, oh yeah, it's great, you just start scoring turn 1, but you can't actually do that. I mean, even if you've got a paper wall, you're going down to such low credits, I mean, outside of maybe some Grindle shenanigans, to score geothermal fracking on your second turn. It's much more likely that you say, install a piece of ice on your remote, install an HQ, hedge fund, then you start scoring on your second turn, so you're actually scoring your first 2 points on turn 3. Oaktown, you absolutely can score turn 2. If you're not facing Criminal or an Anarch that you think might be running Siphon, you should. If I see an end the run piece of ice and an Oaktown in my opening hand, I know exactly what I'm doing turn 1, and it's install the ice on the remote, install Oaktown advance, and it's so great.
Yeah. When you first showed me the list for this deck before you actually went to the tournament, And you were just like, yeah, just put an agenda into a server turn 1 and you'll score it like every time. I was like, there's no way that works. And then I started playing it and I was just like, oh my God. Cause people weren't even running it. They're like, I guess I can't get it. Like,
it's a solid 8 out of 10 times it works.
Yeah. It's really insane. So we've got 1x posted bounty. Are you usually trying to use this as another way to score a tag, or is this just filling out the agenda suite? Tell me a little bit about this.
No, it's very much there for the Scorch threat. Because, I mean, you could fit a second C source in, but due to my choices, we've only got one C source. So it's nice to have a second option for what's the word I'm looking for? Proactive tag. It can set up some nice situations as well where the runner is damned if they do, damned if they don't. This deck I've been playing and refining since before the Most Wanted list and before the sort of high level of Anarchs in the field. So the value of posted bounty has dropped significantly because of the prevalence of I've Had Worse. Like, it's such an investment in terms of advancing 3 times and not even getting to keep the point that you can't, I mean, unless you're in a desperate situation, you really don't want to be using it if you aren't guaranteeing the kill or guaranteeing some other, game-changing shift, be it, killing someone's same old thing when their levy's in the bin or whatever. So its value in the deck has dropped somewhat since there were more shapers and criminals in the meta, but it's still a nice cheeky wee way of surprising people. It's quite nice if you're on game point as well and they don't know you're running it, which unfortunately everyone does now because I've posted the list, and say, you double advance it and they think, well, I don't think that he's going to try and score a 5-3 for his final point, or, I mean, well, it doesn't work if you're on your final point because you would just score it. But, if it's a geothermal, you'd only advance it once. If it's an Atlas, you wouldn't advance it at all. So they don't run it because they think it's a trap, and then, surprise, surprise, you're dead.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've also got Project Atlas, because I hear it's just a pretty good Wayland agenda.
I'm terrified for rotation when that cycles out. I don't know what I'm going to do.
You mean without a universal tutor in Corp?
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
doesn't use a click? I don't know what Wayland's going to do without this agenda, because it's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have to seriously reevaluate, although I suppose that's true of pretty much every faction, both Corp and Runner.
Don't worry, Yellow won't lose AstroScript.
I mean, I was trying to avoid bitching about NBN, but if we want to go on that route.
Yeah, no, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of cool tricks that we're going to lose, obviously. Like, people keep complaining about Wizard. I'm like, don't worry, he's not going to be around that much longer. Like,
between, 6 and 8 months, presumably.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that's going to be crazy. But yeah, that's another video and another conversation. But Atlas is just fantastic because you have immediate kill combo threat if you have a counter on this.
Yep, absolutely. And whilst that's quite easily played around either by having I've Had Worse in hand or just the standard Plascrete, or the even more traditional just money up, it can slow the runner down. I would say, actually, I suppose that's probably something worth mentioning. The Atlas counters are probably less and less getting used in this deck for threatening or implementing the kill combo. Quite frequently, particularly because Anarchs are rocking turntable, I'll score an Atlas and then I will just fire out hostiles from it. And then you go from 2 points to 4 points. And it's been 3 turns. And they need to start running wildly, and maybe you've already got Scorch in hand, maybe they hit a snare. And hey, even if you don't and they don't hit a snare, you're still on 4 points.
Right. That makes sense. So, going down to assets, we have some blasphemy here. We only have 2 copies of Jesus Jackson Howard.
Actually, I'll talk about this then if you do some riffing while I find a comment on this list, because there's someone I want to give a shout out to. So, because the deck started out as a Genesis Cycle Super Modernism thing, there were no Jacksons because Jackson wasn't released. And then I was playing around with it, still no Jacksons. I think I was even still holding on to a green level or 2, although obviously the value of that drops outside of building a better world. But generally speaking, you don't need Jacksons. You, in fact, don't want to be spending the clicks overdrawing with Jackson to either clear or improve your hand, it's really indicative of why the original Supermodernism lists ran anonymous tip. You just want something to go in the remote or a piece of ice to make the remote safe again, or, well, as safe as remotes get, and then keep scoring. However, there is a gentleman hacker named Noise, and if you have literally 0 Jacksons, you can have 4 points sitting in the bin turn 1, and
right.
I don't know how you win those games without
right.
Jackson.
I was going to say, there is a runner called Noise who, if you literally have no Jacksons, you will literally lose the game, which is why he was designed in the first place. Cause I remember I played in the Genesis cycle where Personal Workshop Noise with stim hacks, you would just put every virus you possibly could on Personal Workshop. Be like, all right, I'm going to run, and at the end of this run, mill 9 cards. Let's see what I get.
Yep.
But yep, so we've got a Shattered Remains.
Oh, let me just give a shout out to
sure.
Netrunner DB user Techie. Obviously, when you post a list, people often have like suggestions for what you could do to change the list, and his were my favorite because they, I don't know their gender, suggested dropping the Jacksons for 2 reversed accounts. And I thought, man, that's
some serious brave play.
Like, I feel like this deck is quite ballsy, and Techie really one-upped me there.
Yeah, reversed accounts. I mean, if you want to go like full ham, you absolutely can. So we've got a single copy of Shattered Remains.
Yeah. So it has obvious uses in getting rid of Plascrete. Less obvious, or well, still quite obvious uses getting rid of a turntable, because obviously from the agenda suite we've got stuff with tokens, we've got 1-pointers and 2-pointers, there's some vulnerability there. So if you can kill a turntable, that's great. If you can make them run through an archer and say a spider web to do it, that's even better. It's still worth doing. One of the better uses for it against Shaper is taking out clone chips, because the real key for this deck is, can you find the breaker that you need to get into the remote right now? And clone chip's really good for being able to do that. So I'm happy to take a clone chip. If they're at MU, I'll take an Astrolabe, and if all that does is make them lose an SMC, fine. That's good enough.
Right. No, that's fair.
So I suppose like the final thing to say is it's something you can advance in your remote that isn't an agenda.
Right. That you can bait run, because they're going to get the sense, generally speaking, that anything that you advance is likely an agenda. Yeah. And this punishes them for that assumption.
Yeah.
So we've got 3 snares. You want to talk about going back to super modern days. 3x snare in Wayland is like bread and butter.
It's so good. Like, it seems like quite a, I don't know, like a crass or lazy choice. Like, I'll just put snare in my deck and hopefully they'll hit it and I'll win by accident. But
no.
You know, like,
if you hit this and an agenda,
yeah, multi-access is a risky proposition against this deck. I've won numerous games by my opponent legworking me.
Oh, it's awful.
Or Gang Sign Leela is a fun one, because Leela's quite a bad matchup because Leela's quite a bad matchup for Rush, because you need to be careful about what click you score on, and there's the threat of account siphon, blah blah blah. So you just wait till you've got some stairs in hand, and then you install a hostile in the remote, so then you can score it with a click left to scorch them once they hit a snare, and that feels pretty good. That's
really funny.
But yeah, so the snare, I'm probably covering old ground for anyone who's familiar with Supermodernism back in the day, but it's not just there for enabling the kill, although it absolutely can do that, just the sheer level of disruption that it can do. So both if it hits breakers out of the hand, or recursion pieces, or economy, or whatever good card is relevant at the moment, if a snare hits that out of the hand, that can be huge. Once they hit a snare, the threat of snare can also be huge. So they slow down, they start drawing up and leaving clicks before they run. That can give you the breathing space to force out another agenda. And plan A, B, and C with this deck is always just squeezing out one more agenda.
Right. And it's also worth noting that any deck that runs snare in where they know that the kill combo could fire, usually after somebody hits a snare, they spend the rest of their turn recovering from the snare.
Yeah.
So it buys you a turn.
Absolutely.
And if they hit it on their last click, then they're dead. So we have a Chrysium grid. I hear this is a pretty good green card.
Yeah. It would be nice to have 2 because obviously a Count Siphon can be a problem if it hits before you get your economy up and running. It's just a matter of deck space.
Right. And this deck can run pretty poor and can run on pretty low money, and so it's not like the end of the world, but you want to be able to deal with it if you can.
Yeah, I'm going to keep coming back to it, but like the only money you need is the money you need to score. Don't worry if the runner is on 40 credits, unless they have Vamp, in which case do. But as long as you've got however much money you need to protect your remote and score your next agenda, that's fine.
Right, absolutely. So we've also got a Cyberdex, which I imagine is just for those big medium digs primarily.
Big medium digs also, just the stuff that Cyberdex is good for, killing Day Sucker tokens mid-run so that they can't instant parasite a piece of ice when it's important. Also occasionally relevant if you're on match point and you're sitting on a hostile but they're threatening Clot. Just the usual Cyberdeck stuff.
Right.
But, you've got the medium digs, you've got the Data Suckers, and you've got the Clot. Yeah.
Going back to our super modernism roots, we got 3 beanstalks.
Yep. So that's entirely the reason that we'll sort of include restructure in this conversation as well. The reason why there's 3 beanstalks and only 1 restructure is you don't only need Operation Economy for this, but the primary function of Operation Economy is to recover from like an overspend to protect an agenda that you scored. So the thing that's hard is getting back from low credits, which is why beanstalks is good.
Right, absolutely. And, and since Kim's not popular, it's not going anywhere on, like, any type of asset economy.
Yeah.
We have a casting call where CT gets caught going to play herself, I guess is the theme here.
Absolutely. She couldn't resist. She's a narcissist. Or just, a consummate thespian, I suppose.
Or just a little girl who doesn't understand consequences. Really, either one of those work.
Look, Dan, it's the cyber future. People need to grow up fast.
Apparently.
Youth is no excuse.
Youth is no excuse. But yeah, so for those of you guys who don't know, it's a zero-cost operation. You install an agenda face up, and then you put a condition on it that if they take it, they get 2 tags. So it's worth noting that in Argus, if they're not playing Film Critic, you're saying, yeah, man, you could totally have this Oak Town for 3 tags.
Yeah. I remember playing a friend of mine who I did play at the tournament, but this was a game prior to the tournament, and I casting called an Oak Town. He hummed and hawed for about 5 minutes, ran the 3 iced server that it was in, and I said, no res, no res, no res. And he's just like, I guess I'll take it. Seesaw, Scorch. Like, it's such a tempo swing, putting either the 3 tags or 2 tags and 2 meat damage. As long as you draw it before the runner's on match point or before they draw their Film Critic, I find it's pretty much a guarantee of 2 free points every game. And
you need them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We've got Fast Track because sometimes you're going to have windows because of gear check and you need to find that agenda.
Yeah. Fast Track is another one of that I would like to be a 2 of.
That's like the story of this deck. Yeah.
With 12 agendas, like, you generally have something to score, but if you don't, Fast Track's a lifesaver.
Right. It's also just funny to do Fast Track shenanigans in Wayland where you're like, yeah, you can not levy me. You can legwork me, because they don't know that you've also got the 2 snares.
Yeah, exactly. And it works both ways. So, if you're playing someone who doesn't know your deck, then you do it and they hit the snares. Or if you're playing someone who does know your deck, you do it when you don't have any snares.
Right.
And they won't legwork you.
We've got hedge funds and restructures, because money.
Yeah.
We've got Scorched Earth, because, we'd like to burn people's house down.
Absolutely.
And we've got a single sea source, which is going back to the super modernism roots over the mid-season, put the single tag on people and drop the bombs on them.
Yeah. So, other than just influence concerns, the reason why we're C-sourcing rather than mid-seasoning is generally the windows you have to mid-seasons, although this isn't always... the windows you have to C-source, although this isn't always true, are when the runner has had to go and make a desperate play to stop you winning or to stop you putting yourself in a position where it's very likely you're going to win. So we're not setting up for the kill here. We're exploiting the runner stopping us from winning.
Right. So as far as ice is concerned...
Oh boy.
We've got a changeling in here. A singleton.
Yep. I hate that piece of ice.
You hate it?
I hate it so much.
But
there's not a huge but, to be honest. There's a lot of neutral ice in this deck, and if there were any more neutral ice that fitted what I was doing, it would probably replace Changeling.
Why not Bastion then?
Because, which I'm sure we'll cover in a moment, a lot of the ice is very specifically geared towards stopping or slowing down runners who are using Faust as their primary breaker. However, that is not 100% of the field. So, Changeling doing double duty as effectively a double gear check. Go get your barrier breaker. Cool, now it's a sentry. So it does have value in that respect, but I'm very, very rarely happy to see it. It's so expensive to res. It's not that expensive to break. It's an overcosted piece of ice, which is the story of a lot of Wayland ice. But you do need some kind of game against non-Faust runners beyond them just not having a breaker, and Changeling kind of gives you that. It also gives you another potential sentry with an end the run on it, which is useful if you're up against, say, Stealth Criminal or Stealth Shaper that splashed Switchblade. Which can be bad for you, but that gives you a little bit more game to stack sentries and tax out their stealth sources. Okay,
that's fair. We've got one ice ball. It's a staple. It's good. It's very well costed.
Absolutely. I like ice wall primarily for just chucking on a central that I don't want the runner to be able to run completely freely. Say I've got a hostile in hand turn 1, throw an ice wall down. I don't care if that gets parasited away or becomes totally irrelevant once you've got your corroder. It's there to buy me a turn. Although I will say, ice wall for 1 to res is actually quite, it's not good against Faust, but compared to a lot of other ice, it is quite nice because it either wastes a parasite or it's costing them a card per run and it costs you 1 credit. So that's fine.
Right. We've got a Mirumati.
I'm not wild about Marimati. I think that the situational benefit of having it on HQ and it therefore costing Faust 2 cards or Corroder 3 credits is worth having 1. But often it doesn't even end up on HQ. If I need an end the run on the remote, then Marimati goes down. You can't be a slave to its ability because quite frankly its ability isn't that great. It's good, but it's not fantastic.
Right. We've got Spiderweb, which does do, I would say, a decent amount of work in the current meta, especially against Faust-heavy runners.
Yeah. So the primary use for Spiderweb is on the remote when they don't want to overextend themselves, stopping you scoring. It's not so good on centrals because they'll just bounce off and parasite it and kill it in 2 turns. Yeah, 2 turns.
Right.
But if you can res it on a crucial run where they have to spend the 3 cards with Faust or Jack out because they don't want to spend the 3 cards on Faust, then that's good.
Yeah. We've got a Wraparound. Wraparound's a really good piece of ice.
Wraparound is good. It has one weakness in what we're doing, which is that it means it can either be broken by Faust if they're in a desperate situation. I'm basically just talking as if Anarchs are the only thing in existence, so we can loop round and basically it's a slightly expensive ice wall against everyone else. But the problem with it against Anarchs is that it means that they have 2 options to break it, either David or Faust. Obviously, Faust is incredibly expensive for them to do it, but if they're committed or they're in a good position, they can. So that is one slight problem with Wraparound. But a good thing about it is, say, if you combo it with an archer on a server, then a David isn't going to get you through both.
That's true. We've got Enigma. We've got 3X Enigma.
Enigma, my favorite ice.
Yeah, it's really good value, especially early in the game.
Yeah, it's in fact so much my favorite piece of ice that in the final round of Swiss, my friend Stephen, hi Stephen, I installed Noketown behind Enigma first turn, and he looked at his hand, thought for a second, just dropped a Cyber Cipher on the remote and ran it.
Yeah.
Just 'cause he was so sure that was what it would be, and he was correct.
We've got 2X Archer, where we've got 3 hostiles and a posted bounty, so chances of us being able to fire the Archer without it really impacting us is high.
Yep.
And if you can land this, man, is it still great if you can hit somebody with these.
I would say I find it quite rare that you get like a really, really good Archer land. People are pretty wise to it. But sometimes it buys you the window you need. I don't res them lightly. I value the point from the hostile takeover more than I value having an Archer kicking around, because even with its 6 strength, people will parasite it, people will fork it. It's nowhere near as permanent as it once was. And, even back in the day, it wasn't necessarily all that permanent because of emergency shutdown. But yeah, it's a good card. It buys you time, basically, like everything else.
We've got a Cobra.
Yep. So Cobra went... Basically, when Salsa Island... It was Salsa Island it came out in, wasn't it? Was spoiled. Yeah. Everyone I spoke to was pretty down on Cobra, and I pointed out to them that they weren't playing Wayland, and so they had better options. Cobra's nice, though. People will frequently, very early on, assume that you're running, just your straight Wayland and the run ice. Sorry, do you want to say for
No, I was just going to come. I think you're going to the exact same place where I was going to go with my question, so go ahead.
Oh, okay. So people assume that you're running End the Run Ice, particularly on your centrals. So they will quite happily face check stuff, because Wayland Ice tends to just bounce you off it. So you will get surprise hits with Cobra, which is nice. The primary function is basically just like as a pseudo gear check, the same way as Grim is, where you need to find your sentry breaker and the breaker for whatever's behind the Cobra in order to get into the remote.
Right. No, I was going to say, that's what I was going to comment. I've gotten a surprising number of hits with that. And also our next piece of ice, which people haven't seen in a long time, so a lot of people aren't prepared for it, and that's Grim, which was the first bad publicity ice.
Ooh, you might be right. I think Grim may have come out to just as I started playing.
Yeah. But it's a 5 for 5 that trashes one program, and you get one bad pub. But I've sniped a ton of programs with this card.
Man, it's been a while since I landed a Grim, to be honest. So this deck was originally built when Prepaid Kate was the deck to beat. So things like Grim and things like Changeling had a higher value because their primary way of breaking sentries was Mimic. And obviously they had Sharpshooter as well, which works on Grim, but it's a one-time use. So you can tax out their clone chips. It's clone chips they're not using for SMC and stuff. The value of Grim has dropped significantly with David being everywhere. But much like Wraparound, if it's on the same server as an Archer, then that presents them problems. If they don't have a David, it's 3 cards, which is fine. It's okay. It's another one of the cards in the deck that if Wayland had better ice, it probably wouldn't be there.
Right. It's also just worth noting that David is very popular, but because of the MWL, it's not like my Noise deck that used to have the Street Peddler into David and then get it back instantly.
Yeah.
Anarch doesn't really have access to instant speed David anymore.
Yeah, for sure. I suppose maybe possibly one of the reasons that Grim is less useful in this deck than one might suppose is people assume that I'm more willing to res archers than I am. So if I score a hostile and then install a piece of ice on over my remote, they'll immediately assume that's an archer, and it very rarely is. So David tends to go down as a priority, which is a shame, but, you've got them a click and 3 credits, and that's fine.
Yep. We've got 2 swordsmen for the same reason that a lot of decks are including a swordsman. As you've mentioned many times when we've discussed this Ice Suite, Faust is the enemy of a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. So, swordsman, I mean, I don't know if I have anything new to say about swordsman. Swordsman kills Faust, it's good. Obviously, the complaint people have about swordsman as a counter to Faust is that it's very easily dealt with by Mimic and also Parasite. And that remains true in this deck, but I suppose sort of on a higher level theory of the deck, the strength this deck has against Faust Anarchs is it negates the significance of them making your remote not permanent. This deck never has a permanent remote. This deck's remote is made irrelevant as soon as you have the Icebreaker for it, regardless of how much money you have, because it's all cheap to break, and I'll be giving you loads of bad pub anyway. So, Swordsman just giving you 1 turn or 2 turns, that's fine. That's all you need.
Right. Yep. This is all about creating binary situations and scoring windows. There's no long-term game plan with this deck. Which is great for tournaments also. Saves a lot of time.
You get a lot of free time.
Yeah. Go get a sandwich, So we also have Mother Goddess, which is my absolute favorite include in this deck. Because if you want to talk about a great agenda to rush an Oaktown behind.
Yep. So it's partially there just because I've got so many barriers anyway that Bastion doesn't do that much work as a gear check because the barrier breaker is going to be one of the first things they go for. So its weakness in that it gains other ice's subtype isn't necessarily that relevant most of the time. It also gives you a little bit of game against decks that don't run an AI breaker. It's a rare situation where you can bullshit out more than one agenda behind a Mother Goddess because they can't break it with anything in their deck. But sometimes it happens, and those few times make it slightly more worthwhile than Bastion, which most of the time would just be a 3 credit tax, which they'll be paying with bad pub anyway.
Right, yeah. Yeah, 100%. So, everybody watching at home, that's the deck. And as you know, we're going to go take it for a spin on competitive Jinteki and see how we do. Seamus, always a pleasure having you on, man.
Thanks for having me.
And everybody at home, you can catch us on the test run. And until next time, always be running.